Margaret and Skye, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. I'm honored to have you on and super excited for our conversation today as we celebrate. I don't know if that's the right word, but we discuss May being mental wellness month, if we will. So mental health awareness month. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for having us here.
Thanks,
We're
John.
delighted to have a chance to chat with you.
Yeah, well, Margaret, you and I were at the New Mexico Youth Soccer AGM a couple of months back and got to watch your talk, and we got to chat afterwards. And I was so excited about this topic and so excited to learn about the U.S. Center for Mental Health and Sport. And but I want to, so before we jump in, I want to give you each a chance to give a little bit about your background, and then especially touching upon the refereeing piece, which is how you meet, because some people might say you don't have a lot of mental health if you want to be a referee. So let's just start there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I am currently the executive director of the U.S. Center for Mental Health and Sport. We're a nonprofit organization based out of Clemson, South Carolina. And in addition to doing the executive director role, I also am finishing up a PhD where I'm doing research specifically in mental health and sport, and that is at Clemson University. So, but as you said, part of this came about because Skye and I met in the referee world. So I have been a soccer referee for over 30 years now, 10 of which I was a FIFA referee representing the United States all over the world, which was amazing. And in 2015, I was the only American selected to work in the Women's World Cup. But certainly, as you indicated, there are times that career path can have its own challenges for mental health. Certainly some risks at play there. There are also amazing parts of a referee career and a lot of opportunities that I had to travel all over the world and make friends all over the world and just accomplish incredible things. But at the same time, there's a lot of performance pressure and different aspects of that. And so in realizing that with my own career, wanting to make sure that there are additional resources out there for people to know where to turn when they are struggling with mental health challenges with sport or just with learning how to thrive through some of the times that there are more difficulties and more risk factors kind of at play coming at you all at once, whether from life in general or from the sport itself.
And what's interesting, and then Skye, will turn it over to you, is this, there's so much pressure on officials, not just soccer referees, but officials in any sport to get it right. And there's so much, armchair quarterbacks who are able to watch the slow motion replay of everything. And of course, at the highest level now, we have VAR, but we have VAR in some, but not others. And we're recording this, and I know you guys were traveling yesterday, and just in the men's Champions League yesterday, there was a really bad refereeing mistake in injury time that prevented a tying goal from Bayern Munich, where an AR raised the flag too soon on a play that was actually onside and should have let it play out and VAR'd it, and he didn't, and the referee blew the whistle and Bayern scored the tying goal in the 102nd minute or something like that, and it didn't count, and then the game ended, and lots of controversy, and so everyone in the world can see that mistake up front and center. And so, yeah, it's a hard thing. So Skye, what about your background? Talk about your work and what put you here.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up playing hockey, grew up in Canada playing hockey at fairly high levels, and then kept sort of with my educational process, got my PhD and took a job at Clemson. I've been at Clemson University as a professor for 18 years. And as an aside to that, sort of started officiating soccer a while ago as well, and was able to officiate some semi-pro and USL kinds of things, NCAA for the last 24 years. And then in 2012, I had been taking students to the Paralympic Games for a number of iterations. 2012 saw a bunch of the Paralympic versions of soccer, so CP, TBI, as well as blind, and really sort of reached out to US Soccer and said, how do I get involved in that side of it? And 2014, there was a tournament up in Canada, just leading up to the Pan Am Games in Toronto in 2015. And 2015, I took over as the head of officials for the International Federation of CP Soccer, and have officiated all around the world. And when I heard Margaret got sort of was hanging up the FIFA badge. I'm like, here's a great opportunity to bring an excellent official into, and so brought her into the CP soccer world as well, and officiating the Paralympic version of the game. And then really with this, it was kind of the professional side for me was sort of working on a number of grants, and we've been working with veterans from the Department of Veteran Affairs. We had a number of grants through that to get veterans back into adaptive soccer programs. So looking at injured military vets, getting them back involved in soccer programming, and really wanted to do more for them. And just initially we'd bring them to campus, do a camp for them, and sort of send them home, and wanted to do more. And again, looking at the 20 to 22 vets a day dying by suicide, as well as just sort of more opportunity for growth and sort of how to continue to develop them. We implemented some mental health first aid course within that veteran programming, as well as giving them a grassroots US soccer grassroots coaching license. And bringing those two things together, in addition to bringing these vets together with shared experiences, really, we sort of saw the power of how mental health within the sport environments could really help folks not only recognize, but sort of overcome some of their own challenges and support one another through potentially challenging processes, obviously, with many of the veterans that we had seen. So Margaret and I went to Scotland and got an invite to Scotland to see how the Scottish FA were implementing mental health training in all their clubs across the country. And then just sort of came back to the US and really thought through how do we contextualize this to sort of the American sport environment, as well as, what were some of our values and visions for how this might work. In 2021 started the US Center for Mental Health and Sport as a non-for-profit. So it's sort of snowballing into multiple worlds colliding to really try and have impact in a really positive way.
Well, given your travel schedule, it sounds like, this is what, people are looking for this, right? Of like, okay, we realize there is a problem out there. How do we combat it? And so, I don't think anyone's listening going, okay, there's not a need for this, but what went from, okay, let's do the research. And Margaret, I forget, you told me what's your research? What's your PhD in exactly?
Yeah, so I am in the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management Department at Clemson University. So that's my degree is PRTM, Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management, but my research specifically is in mental health and sport. And the reason that I'm doing my research within a Parks and Recreation Tourism Department is because it's really focused on how do we provide better life experiences, better quality of life, life satisfaction through sport and recreation and pieces like that. So rather than doing a degree on like the sport business side, I'm really doing study of behavioral sciences within the sports space.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I remember now you and I talking about this of like, right, let's just call it grassroots sport in general, right?
Yes.
Park and recreation sport, AYSO, Little League, whatever, right? Sometimes the hardest kids to coach because they're just learning and whatever, and yet, correlated with our least trained coaches. Oftentimes it's a mom or a dad whose only qualification is, are you available? Right. And then, we turn them over and they're like, okay, well, what's the last thing I did? Oh, I played high school football. Let me run this 8-year-old practice like my high school varsity football practice. All right, we're going to start with laps. Right. And it's like, next thing you know, kids are quitting, kids are dropping out. And I know the statistics around, the huge dropout rate of children in sport when they're coached by an untrained coach. Right. And so is this really where you see not necessarily the biggest need, but certainly a huge need?
We absolutely see a huge need there. And when we started this organization, we actually started thinking we were coming into the grassroots sports space and just youth sport in general, because we assumed that college athletic spaces and elite athletic spaces had all of the resources that they needed when it came to mental health. And what we have discovered quickly through the calls for our services is that there is a need for this information at every level of sport, from the grassroots sport, community sport level, all the way up through elite Division I NCAA athletics. And so we've run the gamut. We also work with Special Olympics. We've done work with Special Olympics International. So it's a wide variety of athletics that we've worked in. And ultimately, we just change the conversation. As Skye and I have both worked at all of these different levels of sport, we're really able to make the connections at all of the levels. And we just change the conversation that we're having to make sure that it's appropriate for the different types of pressures or risk factors that might be faced more commonly at that level of sport. But certainly one of our goals with starting this is recognizing that people in general, our communities need more education about mental health. How do we recognize if someone's struggling, and how do we support that person? And we have a lot of physical health. We tend to have a lot more physical health knowledge across our communities. We would expect that if we were out at a sport field anywhere, there's probably someone around nearby who knows first aid, has been trained in first aid. But we don't necessarily have that same information across the board when it comes to mental health. And so we just think it's really important to start getting our communities to have more knowledge so that everyone can feel more comfortable with supporting each other, even if it doesn't mean that they need a psychiatrist or psychologist, but just that entry level of how do I provide initial support so that it can become a stronger community.
Yeah. And Skye, what was the impetus by saying we need more than just information? We need a U.S. Center for Mental Health and Sport, and starting a nonprofit and everything that goes into that, like creating a clearinghouse for this.
Yeah, we've had a whole host of organizations sort of reach out and want to work with us as we sort of move forward. And largely that's because our approach has always been the sport environment is a really powerful place. And yet we use it to develop sort of sport skills, but we don't think about other community, sort of the surrounding community development components that go into that. And for us, it really can become sort of the development of mental health awareness through the sport environments. And so the example we always use in one of our trainings is one of the best ways to recognize someone is struggling is to have a baseline understanding of what they normally behave as, and then recognize these changes of behavior over an extended period of time. Well, we know in the sport environment, even as kids, we spend a lot of time together. We care about one another, and we're able to recognize some of those changes of behavior if we know what to look for and we're paying attention. And so we just sort of kept realizing that, like this, again, the sport environment is really powerful in a really positive way if it's done well. And we could utilize sort of the power of these communities that spend a lot of time together with education to then advance almost this sort of community level development of mental health awareness.
Yeah.
Really, things that the Surgeon General are calling for, and right, it's not in the hospital system. It's at the community level of recognition, which is really important as well.
Yeah, and I love this idea. I think there is this false assumption that sport is good, right? And I don't think sport is neither good nor evil. It's neutral. It's who runs it, how's it run, who wields the influence. That determines whether it's a positive or negative experience. And I think most, no parent signs their kid up thinking this is going to be a bad experience, but they don't do any research into, well, what is this organization and how do they train their coaches and what is their philosophy and what are their values? And then the fallout from that is so many people put their kids in organizations which are very transactional. And they might get the soccer part right or the hockey part right or whatever, but they don't get the human part right. And then the kid gets injured, burned out, quit, and has all this, just use the colloquialism of baggage that they carry with them from this negative sport experience where the parent never had any intent that that's what was going to happen. Correct?
That is correct. And actually, I have to throw it over to Skye because he always talks about the car.
See, we were thinking the same thing. It was perfect.
Mm.
I have said consistently in my initial 10 years of research at Clemson were sportsmanship and ethical behavior and those kinds of things. And in talking with parents all the time, you sort of put it to them and say, you spend more time shopping for a car than you do for your coach, and sort of who's going to shape the life of your child for the next year or longer. And so we're like, well, why is that? Like, why aren't we investing more time in and finding the coach that aligns with our values and that we know is going to sort of take our child, not just in terms of their performance where we want it to be, but also in terms of their ethics and their understanding of people and just sort of that compassion of one another.
Yeah, I mean, or your electrician or your plumber or whatever, right? You do all this research and read all the reviews, and then you just sign your kid up for sports, and because, well, that's where their classmates are, and you never ask. And I see this, and I hear from people all the time about the toxic fallout from time to time, right? And they never look. I just had a conversation with a parent the other day of, oh, we might move to this club, and I'm like, have you spoken to the 5 families who were on that team last year who quit? Do you think maybe you should talk to them before you just go, it seems like a better soccer team, or it seems like a better hockey team? It's like, yeah, but 5 kids quit. That's not a good thing. That should be a red flag. Like, right? If the plumber had 5 bad reviews, you'd be like, I'll find another plumber, so, or if the car, right, had a failed safety test. So yeah, it's hard. So Margaret, you did this amazing exercise in New Mexico that I loved, and where you sort of asked the audience to give terms describing, and I think it was physical fitness or physical health versus mental health. So can you walk our listeners through that? Because I thought this was like a real sort of aha moment for me.
Yeah. So for the listeners, I just would urge you to think about for just a second or two, what are the first words that come to your mind when you think about physical health? If I were to say physical health, what is that equivalent to? Or if I were even to say something like Maria has physical health, what do you think about Maria?
Right. We think she's thin, she's strong, she's fast, she's fit, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right on it. And so we ask people, is that positive, neutral, or negative? And overwhelmingly the responses, well, these aren't positive words. When we think physical health, we're thinking all these good things about our health. But then we often like to compare physical health to mental health because, again, as a community, as a society, we tend to understand physical health so much better. And so when we go to the mental health side of things, if we can parallel it, it starts to put us in a little bit better place of getting it. But so then when we ask that same question, though, of what are the first words that come to mind for mental health, the first words are depression, anxiety, struggling, worried, unstable. We'll get some positive words occasionally, like happy or strength or something like that. But in most cases, we always do a word bubble where the largest word shows up in the middle, or the word that's repeated the most shows up the largest in the middle. And it is almost always depression or anxiety that's the largest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it just is very indicative that as a society, it's no one's fault, but as a society, it's the way we approach this, that even though physical health and mental health, the 2 words are really exact parallel words, we've just substituted one for the other. Our attitude completely shifts. And when we say physical health, we think Maria's doing awesome. She has physical health. That means she's doing well. And if we say Maria has mental health, we immediately think, oh, Maria maybe needs some support. Maria's got something going on. And the truth, of course, as we all know, is we all have physical health and we all have mental health. And both of those fall along a continuum throughout our lifetime. And both of those change throughout our lifetime as well. And neither of them does our place on that continuum define who we are. We like to say often that if Maria broke her arm, we would never say Maria is a broken arm. We say Maria has a broken arm, and we recognize she's going to recover and get better, and it's just this temporary spot she's in. And yet we say Maria is depressed. Right. Well, no, that's not it's not a definition of who she is. It certainly is not permanent. Maybe Maria is experiencing depression, but that's not her. That's a place she's at, and she's going to recover.
Yeah. Skye, any thoughts on that as well? I mean, I'm sure you've done these same workshops and seen the same sort of ideas, right?
It is. It's almost comical, actually, to look at some of the different groups that we've worked with to see how they approach it. And we did a really nice parallel between a Division I and Division II program, and the language was not similar. And I really do think it's again just part of the approach of the different elements of not only the athletic director and sort of the entire department, but just the approach of the difference between D1 and D2 in some respects. And then we went to Special Olympics, and they had a different approach, even further with some of their language, and how they sort of view sport and therefore view some of the words that go with that. And so it was, we still see that sort of leaning positive versus a little more negative in terms of the language, physical and mental, but we definitely often see them stronger at things like a D1 program, sort of stronger parallels rather than at other programs where they are likely more inclusive of their approaches to sport in general, and therefore are sort of thinking more fully about well-being and that kind of thing.
What's the word? Let's go to that Division I athlete. Like, what does the word balance mean to you guys, right? Because this is a conversation that Jerry and I have, and for those who are just listening, they're smiling, right? So, this is a conversation Jerry and I have with teams that are competing to win a conference championship, that are competing to win a national title, right? And when kids talk about balance, it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? Because, a high performer in any realm goes out of balance at times, right? And I think sometimes kids are told that balance is something that you need to have on a daily level, when in reality, hey, if you're a Division I lacrosse player in the spring, your life's going to go out of balance for lacrosse, right? And then and academics. And you're not going to have as much free time to go spend with your friends, but in the off season, you're going to have more. Right. And so what do you talk to people when an athlete says, I need more balance in my life? How do they find balance over time, if not in the moment?
Yeah, I certainly can speak to that from the personal level of having been a World Cup referee. Certainly at that stage I was in a 4-year cycle. So for 4 years leading up to the World Cup, it was, certainly I was reffing for a long time before that as well, but there was a 4-year highly intense period leading up to that final selection for the World Cup. And there was not a balance of time or energy. Certainly, there couldn't be, because there's so much competition. You have to be at that elite level. But what I would say is there still can be a balance of who you are as a person and emotionally, and recognizing the value that you have outside of the sport. And I think there certainly was a period of time during my own career that I really struggled with. If I make a mistake on the field, it equals me being a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important for us, as we have elite athletes who are in these stages of their careers where they do have to give it more time and more energy, and maybe that idealistic balance of having all sorts of personal time is not always realistic. But I think it is realistic to make sure that athletes still take a chance to recognize, what is my value outside of sport? Why am I an important person? Why, yes, I want to go out and do the best that I can, and I hope to not make mistakes. But if I do make a mistake, it doesn't mean that my world is over, because I think sometimes we actually end up having athletes even perform worse. As an organization, we are not about performance, we're about mental health. But I think it absolutely does affect performance negatively if we're so worried about making a mistake, because we think we're going to be destroyed as people if we do. And rather than recognizing that this is something that ultimately I started because I loved it and I have value in it, and I believe that it's a great thing that I can do, and I can do a good job with it. And if I make a mistake, life will still go on, and I still have value. So
yeah. And I think, in Skye, this is like, we talk on this podcast a lot about the difference between a performance-driven identity, which is what you're describing, right? If my whole identity is about performance and I make a mistake, then I must be a loser, a disaster, or whatever, versus a purpose-driven identity, right? And so I understand my why and the deep meaning why I'm doing this, right? Why am I going out of balance to become a World Cup referee? Why am I sacrificing a lot to become a Division I athlete, or to become an Olympian or a Paralympian or whatever? Like, and I think that's where like autonomy plays into it as well. So when this is, in this case, athlete driven, right, then I would think, then those mistakes and everything are much more seen as part of the process. And I'm far more in touch with my purpose when I own the journey than I am if, my parents are driving the journey or my coach is driving the journey. What do you think, Skye?
Yeah, we talk about identity a lot, and sort of that, coaches, if there's one thing that I can do that can help, and a lot of times give them a day off to go paint. Like,
Yeah.
Go give them the day off to go cut the lawn. I mean, it doesn't matter. Give them a day off to go start to establish an identity outside of their own sport environment.
Yeah.
And again, if that's just to dabble in it while they continue to focus on high performance, so be it. But at least then when retirement hits, and for most of the kids, retirement is at 17 or 18 years old, right?
Yeah.
For the next batch, it's at 21 or 22. And we
Yeah.
don't talk about retirement with these kids and what does your life look like sort of post-retirement sport. But then at least they've dabbled in opportunities for other identities, and they can sort of start to see that there is a life and a world beyond this high performance life, which many of them have chosen and really do appreciate. But it allows that transition from sport to perhaps something else to be a little bit easier.
Yeah. We had a guy named Brad Stahlberg on the podcast. Him and a guy named Steve Magnus have this newsletter called The Growth Equation. And Brad told the story of this Norwegian, I think he was a speed skater, who was struggling with his performance at the big events until he decided, he's like, I'm going to be an Olympic speed skater from Monday through Friday. And then Friday afternoon to Sunday, I'm going to be a guy and I'm going to go out with my friends and I'm going to do this. And the analogy he used, which I really like, he said, you have to think of performance as a house with many rooms, and identity as a house with many rooms. If you only go to one room every day, all day, and all of a sudden that door is locked, AKA you lose, you get injured, you're in trouble. But you can spend a lot of time in that room, but you got to visit the other rooms. And might be, like you said, painting, playing guitar, all these different things, so that, yeah, you know what? This is part of who I am, but it's not who I am, right? It's something that I do. It's not who I am. And I mean, that really is, I think, a lot of times the basis of stress and anxiety and all these things that we're talking about with regards to mental health and sport, isn't it, Margaret? Like if I have a good sense of who I am, I'm less likely, I'm going to still feel stressed because I care. I'm still going to feel nerves because this matters to me, right? Just like I'm sure you felt nerves refereeing a World Cup game. Like, if you didn't care, if you're like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to suck, like, then, who cares, right? But no, I want to be perfect because these players work their whole lives to be in a World Cup and I want to give them the best game they've ever had. So of course you're going to be nervous for that, or you're going to be nervous for a test that you care about, or your PhD turns out well.
Yeah, too. Yeah. I mean, the truth is, I was never really nervous for reffing because I always knew that every decision I made was right. All my decisions were right.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. No, but absolutely. I mean, that was something that I really had to train myself to do, because there was a period of time that I became so concerned about what my assessors were thinking, what the critics were saying about my decisions, what the coaches were saying, that I absolutely was not having fun at all in the sport anymore, because I was just so wrapped up in whether everything was perfect. And of course, there's no referee that's ever going to referee a 90-minute game and make every decision perfectly. It's just not, we're human. It's not going to happen. But when I would remind myself why I did this, that I was doing this because it was fun, and I was doing this because it was really just so incredible to be on the field with these amazing athletes, and to be at that level of the sport, and to have the drive to work for that day in and day out. It was such an honor to be there. And when I started focusing on that, my performance got far better, but I also was far happier, because I realized that I wasn't taking all the pressure from the whole world and putting it on myself. I was like building a shield instead, I felt like, from the pressure, and saying, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to make you happy. I'm here to do the best I can to serve the game, and also to enjoy this myself. And the way I enjoy it is doing the best that I can, but not being worried about what you think about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I was reading this really interesting article the other day, because I know a lot of our listeners who are coaches, hear everything about, there's so much in the news now about mental health or mental wellness. And obviously there's professional athletes at the highest level, the Michael Phelpses and the Kevin Loves and professional soccer players, and talking about this thing. And so I was reading this article in the Atlantic, and was talking about this new research. And the word they used was prevalence inflation. And this was really interesting to me. And this is how they sort of defined it, that not all feelings of unwellness are signs of mental illness, the way some people consume so much information about anxiety disorders that they begin to process normal problems of living as signs of decline in mental health. And this is especially true in young people, right? So they're on social media 8 or 9 hours a day. And we know how the algorithms, if I do anything on anxiety or stress or depression, well, it's going to spit out the next video and the next video and the next and that and TikTok and all this. And so you're bombarded with these messages of, well, I guess everyone, it has this, so maybe I do too. And then it becomes this self-fulfilling downward spiral of, well, if I have anxiety, then I'm going to avoid the thing that gives me anxiety. And then I just develop more anxiety about it. And next thing you know, I don't leave the house. So we clearly have mental health needs and people with real problems, right? Real issues. And then we have this prevalence inflation with people who are sort of have convinced themselves of this, just like they say, every med school student convinces themselves that they have every disease in the book that they've just studied because they just read all about it and say, I have all those symptoms too. So what's the coach to do? What's the parent to do to balance these two things and find out, is this a real issue? Or, you know what, like, is this just what we used to call a tough time? It was difficult. And guess what? Sport is hard. You want to be good at something, it's hard. You're supposed to struggle. That's what you signed up for. Like, how do we do those two things? Skye, we'll start with you.
This one's her. This is her
okay.
part of the training even. This falls right in her part of the training. So I'll
Sweet. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I would start by saying, I think one thing is we have to be a little bit cautious about assuming that the way that we grew up or the way things used to be is how they should be now. I think it is really fantastic that these conversations have started and have become more public. And in many ways, we've had a lot of the elite athletes who have been more open about talking about mental health themselves. And so therefore making it more okay for the athletes who are looking up to them to do the same. And I think that there tends to be sometimes from the older generations that didn't grow up with these conversations, the feeling that, well, I push through, like you just tough it out, you just push through and you learn how to do it if you just do it. But I also think that there needs to be an acknowledgement that the world is different now than it was when we all grew up. First of all, just because it's the way it was always done, that we didn't talk about emotions, we didn't talk about how we felt, that doesn't make it the best way because it's what we did. But additionally, certainly when we didn't have the pressures of social media, that was a whole different world. When there wasn't NIL for the elite athletes, that was a whole different world. When if our young people are growing up with all of this technology and the feeling that they have to fit in and they have to show they fit in 24 hours a day, and they're already pushed to the very edge of what they can handle, and then we ignore the signs that they could be struggling, it just might be that these conversations are more needed now than they have been in the past. And so I think the world has changed to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I'll just say, I don't think anyone could disagree with that, right? Yeah. And it's hard to say that, like, I saw this, or I heard this psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, he's got a new book out about anxiety in children, especially, and around social media. And he said, he said two things that really stuck with me. Number one, childhood has changed from a play-based childhood in 2010 to a phone-based childhood, right? So mammals forever have learned through play, and now they learn through a phone, right? That's how they're soothed. That's how they're whatever. And then number two, he said we've tend to overprotect our children in the real world and underprotect them in the online world. And these two things have really caused a lot of this stress and anxiety in children. That being said, right? Skye was a hockey player. Skye got yelled at by his coach. I got yelled at by my coach. My kid got yelled at by his coach, right? Skye got benched once in a while, or maybe not. Maybe Skye was that good, right? Like I got benched, right? You're an athlete too, Margaret. Like, like there are certain things that come with you're going to make a mistake. You're going to be criticized. You're going to let a teammate down. You're going to let yourself down. That's not different than it was 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ultimately needs to also continue to be the message, though, when it comes to mental health. When we have conversations about mental health, we don't have to pretend that everything is always going to feel good and that we have to stop doing everything in order to make ourselves feel good and then return. And again, if we parallel everything that we talk about with physical health, we know that in order to become better athletes, our bodies don't always feel good. And if we want them to feel good all the time, if we want no pain, whether that's muscle pain or lung pain, we're probably not becoming elite athletes because we learn how to push through that. And I think that there are moments that we also can have the opportunity to become stronger with mental health as well, but also knowing that it's okay to feel that. It's okay. Like we know that feeling that soreness is okay to feel. We know that's a normal part, but we also know that there is a distinct line between I'm sore versus I'm injured, and I shouldn't keep pushing when I'm injured.
Yeah.
And so just being able to have more open conversations, whether it's with the coach or the athletic trainer or with our parents or whomever that is around us, to be able to say, this is what I'm feeling today. Do you think it's okay based on this? Should I keep going? Or is this a point that I do need to go see a professional? Like we don't say I'm not going to talk about it because my muscle is sore. I can still tell my athletic trainer my muscle's sore, and they might come back and say, okay, but I think you're still okay to go train. If that makes sense. Like,
yeah, no, go ahead, Skye.
Yeah, no, I think that's when we think about physical health, we understand sort of the spectrum of a little bit of pain versus a broken leg and I need to stop and get that taken care of. And mental health, we often don't talk about that spectrum, and we assume we talk about mental health, someone must need therapy, instead of someone just needs a day off to get caught up, right? We need a day off to get caught up on our 400 emails. That's going to relieve the anxiety so I can then go focus on the other things again. And I mean, I've noticed that even with my students, like the last day of class, I know that they're really stressed coming up in the finals. I'm like, you get the last day of class back. We're not going to have class today. Go sit by the lake, go do whatever you need to do so that when you come into finals 3 days from now, you're ready to go, or at least you've got a little bit more time. And I think, again, just for me, that sort of helps me understand that not everything is a diagnosable medical condition in terms of mental health, right? We just put a Band-Aid on scratches sometimes, and that's enough to get our physical health to the point where it needs to be. And in many cases with our mental health, we can put Band-Aids, quote unquote, if you will, on things to get us to a better place. Rather than, and that's not to say we don't need to go to therapy. We're working with a group right now that's looking at eating disorders. And they have inpatient eating disorders. They say, well, when's your busiest time for college athletes? Oh, well, in the summer. Like, why in the summer? Well, it's in the summer because the athletes aren't taking the time that they need before that to actually go get treatment. Only they're waiting for the summer because that's when it's most convenient for them. Like, again, to me, that's
also thought about like coming to preseason, got to be fit, got to be light, got to be whatever. So I don't let the coach down, whatever. And so, yeah, then you get that as well. Sorry, I interrupted, but yeah.
But I think that's the spectrum that we have to remember is that just because we may be struggling with a mental health, right, sort of idea, doesn't mean we need to go see therapy, right? We're not clinically diagnosed in that respect, but it might be something challenging. I loved saying, I found out at Clemson, we get 3 free mental health sort of therapy sessions every year as part of our benefits package.
Yeah.
I'm like, how many have I taken advantage of? None. In my mind, it's always been like, you go to therapy when you're really struggling.
Yeah.
And we parallel that into physical health and said, all right, if anyone out there, any of your listeners get 3 free massages every year, how many of us are going to go? And we're all like, heck yeah, give me a free massage. And
Yeah.
we say, well, is it because you're broken? Well,
Yeah.
no, it's because a massage feels good and it gets me to an even better place.
Yeah.
Again, I think if we could think about sort of mental health that way, that right, taking care of our mental health can get us to an even better place. It doesn't always have to take us from the brink of diagnoses. Then again, we can sort of think about how do we push through some of these challenging things without being sort of clinically diagnosed with something.
Yeah, and I like that. And again, no, and then there's the stigma, especially in sports, of right. No one would say to an athlete, "Why are you going to see the strength and conditioning coach? Why are you going to get stronger?" Right? But then, well, why are you seeing the psychologist, or why are you seeing a counselor? Like that's again, this goes back to it's like a sign of weakness. What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? Now, I think it's changing at the highest levels of sport. I remember Dan Carter from the All Blacks. He talked about, he's like, when I started in rugby, if you went to the psychologist, everyone's like, "What's wrong with you?" And when I retired, if you weren't going to the psychologist, everyone was like, "What's wrong with you?" Like you're letting your teammate down. You're letting your team down by not maximizing that part of it. So I like this idea of a spectrum. Is this something that a parent or a coach should say when a kid's saying, "Well, I'm feeling anxious or I'm stressed or whatever"? Like, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 means you can't get out of bed, and 1 means, "Ooh, I stubbed my toe and it was a hard start to the day." Like, do we ask people, like, where are you on that spectrum? And if they say, I think I'm at like a 5. Okay. How can we get you back to a 3? Because what you're doing is hard. So there's going to be a little bit there. I mean, is that a fair thing that a coach could do, that a parent could do?
Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely a way to ask. And it can be other simple ways as well. Like, uh, tell me about what color you feel today. And if they say, you give your example because it's the example that you give.
I
But
do. I said I asked my daughter what color she is, and if she tells me she's blue, and again the audience is probably, oh, she's probably having a down day. I said, no, blue's her absolute favorite color. She's on top of the world. But it's given me the opportunity to ask her, right, ask her a question about something sort of that her emotions or her mental health is related to, and to ask a follow-up question. And the coolest thing is, she then often comes back with, Dad, what's your color today? And so now, even as a sort of a parent father, I've opened up that opportunity to actually talk about our emotions a little bit. And we ask the same thing to coaches, like, coaches, you want your athletes to open up to you. How many of you open up to them? And most coaches are like, nope, don't do that at all. Cause that's, we don't do that.
Right.
And, well, why not? Why aren't we, again, superficial level? We're not going super deep into the woods with our strong emotions, but we can have two-way conversations about those things again, just like we would with physical health.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you guys have, and I don't know if you have any relationship or discussions with him at all, but like Dabo Sweeney at Clemson seems to me to be a very interesting coach in terms of vulnerability, in terms of sort of, these are human beings first and athletes second, and then building a team where people are allowed to be vulnerable and allowed to be themselves and share the journey that they're on that got them there. And I just think that's such an important part of creating the right environment. So I guess what I might ask you is, as a coach, what is the right environment that I can create? What are some things I can do to help my athletes experience the discomfort and the adversity that it takes to get better, while at the same time, not push them over the edge?
yeah, I think it is the challenging them. What I would say is it's just making sure ultimately that as you're coaching players, you also respect them as human beings, as you just said, that you can coach them and you can give them constructive criticism, but you can also reaffirm with them, the reason that I'm telling you this is ultimately because I believe in you and I believe that you can be better and I believe that you can be stronger, rather than saying, I'm criticizing you because you're garbage today. Like that is not helpful for anyone to be able to work through those pieces. And so I think we can be tough at times with athletes as long as it's understood on the other side. It just needs to be really clear. And I think there are all sorts of styles for doing this. So I can't pretend that, one coach can be really tough and that the athletes can't trust that coach because they're really tough. And another coach is much more gentle in things, and all the athletes can then trust them because they're really gentle. I think there can be all sorts of different styles in approaching it, but ultimately the coach needs to establish they are the leader for how these pieces go. We see that. I've seen that throughout my whole career as a referee, that the coaches are really establishing what the culture is like on the sideline and on the field, but also within the culture of the community for mental health as well, that coaches are leading this, and they need to just find ways to make it really clear that the athletes as human beings is what is most important, and the other pieces from there are helping them get better. So it's hard because there's not like a specific black and white answer to that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be easier if we could just say, well, coaches should do 1, 2, 3, 4, but every coach has their own style, and it doesn't mean that one style is right and the next one is wrong. It just means, though, that we have to make sure our athletes feel valued.
And every athlete is individually needs something else, right, Skye? Like, yeah, like I got to know who's in front of me.
I really vividly remember having an awful game at a pretty important championship, and the match assessor, I mean, we walked out the field and we looked at each other, and it wasn't to any surprise that this was not the best. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me. It wasn't a surprise to him. And so rather than him sort of beating me up over that decision or the multiple decisions, it was take a couple days to think about this, almost stew on it. I'll circle back in 1 or 2 days, and then let's process through some of these things. So again, he was allowing me to go through these really difficult sort of self-reflective kinds of things, but only for like a day and a half or 2. And then he took the opportunity to follow up to then say, okay, now let's talk through these things because I care about you and I want you to do better next time. Right. So I think that really, it does well to highlight, as you said, defeat is difficult. And it teaches us things, though. If it's done well from the coach's perspective, from the parent's perspective, it's not that I'm going to, right, literally or figuratively beat you up on the car ride home kinds of things. That's right. We're going to have a good conversation. Then when you're ready to come to the table, let's figure out how difficult this was and how do we get better from here. And I think that may be just a little bit of a different, we're not going to go run laps, although maybe we are because we're not fit, but let's talk through how we got to that point. And I think that, right, we're seeing a lot of the national governing bodies in their coaching lessons, the coaching certifications really talk about, right, giving the athletes more voice, asking them more questions, even in training sessions, to be part of this conversation so that they understand why they're doing the things they're doing. And I think that sort of continues that process of, if I understand where I went wrong, and I mean, I know a bunch of 10-year-olds could say, yeah, that was a really difficult loss, coach. We need to go run more. We need to practice shooting more. Sometimes they almost get us to the point where we need to then take them and sort of formulate how do we get better.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about that car ride home and how for so many kids that causes terrible stress and anxiety. And you see it in the last 20 minutes of the game when they know it's not going to be a pleasant ride home because we're losing or they're having a bad game or whatever. And this, your refereeing assessor, right? Or, sort of giving you this unconditional regard. Take some time, think about this. Let's get the emotion, the tiredness out of it. We'll talk in a couple of days when we can actually have a productive discussion. How many kids would be better off in sport if their parents were able to do that on the car ride home and just say, what do you want for food? And that's it, because that's all you needed in that moment. And you knew you had a bad game. Like, it's not like a kid who plays terribly, they know they had bad. So what are you going to say to them as a coach? What am I going to say to them in that post game that's really going to make them better if I'm tearing them down even more? They already feel terrible that they lost. They already feel terrible that they had a poor game. So, two sort of last little pieces here that I think are really important. How do we as a coach balance this? Because a lot of athletes now know that when they talk about mental health, when they talk about needing a break, all this, when they talk about buzzwords like bullying or abusive behavior, these are things that can shut down coaching immediately. These are things that cost many coaches their job, right? That an athlete can go in in their senior exit interview to college and get someone fired, and they have to move their family and everything like that. And, and so how do coaches manage this when, you know what, like, I have to make you uncomfortable. I have to push you. And I also have to choose the best 11 soccer players, or, the, first 10 in hockey or whatever it is. Like, I got to make people unhappy. I got to make unpopular choices. And yet I'm getting
Welcome
my
to the
legs cut
referee
out from under
world,
me.
John.
What's
Welcome to the
that?
referee world. So welcome to the referee world.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that as well, right? Who gets what match or whatever. But it's like, it's a really hard thing that I've seen more and more coaches come and talk to Jerry and I about. Like, I know what I need to do, but I'm afraid if I do this, that these kids are going to the AD. And next thing you know, I'm fighting for my job.
Yeah, so ultimately, we really promote that sports organizations, whether that be at the high school level, at the youth level, whatever that is, that there are some policies set up around mental health and what the expectations are around mental health. And right now, that tends to be lacking across the board. But what is it that's going to happen if a coach does notice that one of their athletes potentially, they're noticing some signs or indications that an athlete potentially is struggling? What is the route that the coach should take? Should the coach talk to the athlete first? Should the coach talk to the parent first? What are the exceptions of that situation? When, at what point do we consider the athlete an adult, or at least to have the capacity to have that conversation on their own prior to having it with parents? And right now there's very little guidance for coaches about how that works, which does lead them to being very, very nervous about, if I say something, am I going to be in trouble with parent or with school? And ultimately, in many cases, the whole reason that they want to say something or do something is because they're really just concerned about the athlete. And as you say, there are the difficult decisions that coaches just have to make sometimes too, with who gets to play and who gets to travel and all of the pieces that go with it. But we really think that it is ultimately vital that we start. We've had, about 10 years ago, we had all of the concussion pieces come up, where concussion was really clearly becoming a medical issue that people acknowledged and recognized, but there was still half of the world that was trying to not say that existed, and that we didn't really need policy around concussion, and because that was hard to establish. And I think we're in the midst of the hard work of determining what best policies are. And we have, like, the NCAA Sports Science Institute is putting out best practices. We have reports on what best practices are in youth sport. We have a Surgeon General advisory report on how to deal with mental health and social media for our young people. So I think we need to start turning to some of these reports within our sports spaces as well, and say, our Surgeon General for the United States is recommending that coaches are absolutely involved with mental health conversations, and that our parents and coaches and other mentors for young people also are involved in conversations about social media use. And so I think it's just important that we utilize those resources to start setting policies to the best of our ability.
Yeah. And I think so, Skye, like you were given the example before of the player with the broken leg or the bad knee, right? Like, if an athlete hurts their knee, the athletic trainer says to the coach, hey, so-and-so's knee is bad. You got to cut back training 50%, right? But what's happening now, especially on the collegiate level, as we've added in more psychologists and mental health practitioners on the collegiate level, is they sort of operate in silos, and the coach is never notified that there's an issue. And 6 months later, the AD is like, well, for 6 months, I've been hearing from the psychologist, and the coach is like, and this is the first time I've heard about it. And they say, well, it's HIPAA. And obviously in counseling, we have to have that trust. But I think what I've seen the best coaches do is they realize that anyone working in the mental health space specifically for their athletes needs to be in that weekly meeting, just like the athletic trainer, just like the strength coach, just like the whole coaching staff, and like, okay, what's happening? And I also think it's important for practitioners in psychology and mental skills or whatever, come to practice, watch people train, watch the environment. Don't just take that word of this athlete of this is how horrible it is. Like, well, I watched you practice and I don't see anything that you're just, describing to me right now. I just saw a coach trying to make you better. Right. And so I think coaches have to take this collaborative approach But I think on the mental health side, they have to be collaborators as well. And this is the ground that we're navigating right now.
Yeah, ironically, we've got a grant right now from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency that is one component of the grant itself. So the first component is that we're training coaches, parents, athletes in mental health awareness, and then we have paraprofessionals on the ground, wandering the field, checking in with all of those audiences. Again, just A, as a resource, but then as an opportunity, right? If a coach recognizes that something is a little bit different in their athlete, even if they don't want to approach the athlete, they now have a reference point similar to a school counselor, right, in a school environment, to be able to do that. And so it, as you said, it becomes this collaborative community space to be able to continue to engage in those conversations. It's great that the D1s and in some cases the D2 programs have the counselors and the therapists involved. We know of probably a handful across the country of youth sport programs that actually have enlisted some sort of mental performance or mental health individual. And so, the pressures that these kids are facing at the youth environment, as well as the almost unfair power dynamic at this point that coaches have, particularly at the youth levels, for advancement of the athletes and other things, that struggle, I think, is coming together. And I think more of us working together to recognize some of these things is going to help.
Yeah. And I think the last piece here, before you can share how people can touch base with you and get some of the amazing tools that you have, is when we're talking about all this, it's not just athlete mental health, it's coach as well. And I think sometimes those are the most unbalanced, unhealthy people out there. The amount that coaches pour in, the hours, the emotion, the sacrifice of their own families, their own children, for other people's children, can play a tremendous toll. And so as a coach listening, right, I was like the Joe Orman quote, to be a better coach, be a better you. And so you got to get yourself in the right space too, so you can be in the right space for your athletes, correct?
Yeah. That is absolutely right, that we need to look out for our own mental health. And this is very much why we consider ourselves to be a community organization, because the mental health of our athletes is not just coming from their own mental health that's isolated, but it is from the people who are mentoring them and around them as well, and their mental health. So
yeah. What are some of the tools that people can find, and just give people your website and ways to connect with your work? But I know you have tools from obviously bringing you in to present to online stuff and virtual things and programs that people can download and implement for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. So at the U.S. Center for Mental Health and Sport, we are absolutely trying to get the conversation started in the sports space at all levels. We know right now that athletes are 3 times less likely to get help if they're struggling. So it is incredibly important to start the conversation. We have a variety of programs. People can visit our website at www.mentalhealthandsport.org, all spelled out, mentalhealthandsport.org. Certainly, I would love to look at any emails that come in as well, and communicate with anyone who might be interested in our programs. My email address for Margaret Domka is admin@mentalhealthandsport.org. So same as the website, admin@mentalhealthandsport.org. And we have an ACT certification program. It's a 2-hour certificate that's good for 3 years that we present to entire groups. We prefer to do that in person. That's our gold standard, but we can do it virtually as well. We have an Accelerate Mental Health workshop that helps organizations to see what their unique risk and protective factors are, and we work with a validated model to help them really be able to visualize. It's such a visual program to see where their strengths and weaknesses are and how they can establish action plans and policies to best support mental health within their space. In addition to some other supportive conversations with coaches programs, we have an athlete ambassadors program that we would love to get athletes involved. We have many athletes involved. We'd love to get even more athletes involved. We accept applications on a rolling basis, and that can all be found on our website, mentalhealthandsport.org.
Awesome. Well, I have to vouch for you. I've seen you present. It was fascinating. It was interesting. It was interactive, and it was like eye-opening. And again, I things that you said in that moment have stuck with me, and that was quite a few months ago. So congratulations. Like, it's a great talk. It's a great presentation. Skye, I'm sure you're excellent also. I just haven't seen you speak. But I think this is the type of thing, if you're listening to this and you're like, this is what we need, this is an add-on value, or hey, I run a big league and this is a problem, or I'm with a college, I highly recommend people reach out, because it's important stuff and it's good stuff. And in May of 2024 and Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm not surprised you're racking up the frequent flyer miles.
Thanks, John. We really appreciate you having on. And I'm just going to put out one additional reminder as well, that we are a nonprofit organization. And so certainly trying to do our best to make our content and the start of the conversation accessible to everyone. But also, if there are listeners out there who believe in this mission that we are on, we do accept donations. And it's kind of the shameless plug, but this is a place that we're in. It is so helpful. We know our work saves lives. And so any donations also helps expand that work and reach more athletes and keep the athletes with us and well and happy and valued and satisfied. So
brilliant. Margaret and Skye, thank you so much for being on The Way of Champions. I really appreciate the time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you to Margaret and Skye. Again, mentalhealthandsport.org, all written out in an email, admin@mentalhealthandsport.org. If you want to reach out to the organization, and again, just go to the website, see all the tools, book a presentation if you think it's really good. It's really eye-opening. I enjoyed it a ton. And again, things really stuck with me, and I think they will with you as well. So again, we appreciate you listening. Thank you to all our Patreon podcast champions. Thank you to Sprocket Sports. And thank you to everyone who's already registered for the 2024 Way of Champions Conference, whether online, the live stream, or you're coming to Denver in person to see Pete Steinberg, to see Tara Vanderveer, and Jerry and I and a whole bunch of coaches and one more guest coach soon to be announced. It's going to be an amazing event. All right. So everyone, remember, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make a difference. And really this month, May of 2024, focus on the mental well-being of your athletes. Create the right type of environment so that they can thrive and perform their best, not only as an athlete, but as a human being as well. We'll see you again next week, everyone. Everyone, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast this week. This is your host, John O'Sullivan. Just me this week, just John. And I'm so excited to be here with Margaret Domka and Dr. Skye Arthur Banning from the U.S. Center for Mental Health in Sport. Margaret and I met at the New Mexico Youth Soccer AGM. She was giving a talk there, and she's the executive director of this amazing organization. She's a PhD candidate at Clemson, and her focus is on mental health in sport. She was also a World Cup referee, the U.S. representative in the 2015 World Cup, and obviously a professional referee and a FIFA referee, and on the FIFA referee panel as well. She continues to referee in CP soccer and Special Olympics as well. And so she has this interesting background as an athlete, and then as an official, and then working on her PhD and trying to bring more mental health awareness and tools to sporting organizations. Dr. Skye Arthur Banning is an associate professor at Clemson University who's been awarded over $1 million in grants to bring mental health and sports initiative to veterans, individuals with paralysis, Paralympic athletes, and he's also a mental health first aid certified instructor. He's the head of officials for the International Federation of Cerebral Palsy Football or Soccer, and on the board of directors for the United States Association for Blind Athletes, and a U.S. Soccer national referee, coach, and former referee, competitive college, semi-professional referee as well. So in our conversation today, we talk about the center and the work we're doing. We talk about the mental well-being of the athletes. And then we also talk about this idea of the spectrum and when is something just normal struggle and difficulty and you care about it and it's stressful, and when is it really a mental health, anxiety, stress issue that needs professional intervention and supervision, and so much more. We talk about some of the things and some of the tools they present and really just have a discussion of athlete well-being and coach well-being as well. So I think you're really going to enjoy this today, and you can find them mentalhealthandsport.org, and Margaret's direct email as the executive director, admin@mentalhealthandsport.org, all written out, and that's the best way to find them. They got some great tools on the website and great statistics and information as well. Now, before we dive in, just a reminder, the early bird deadline is coming up for the Way of Champions Conference. So if you're going to attend in person or you're going to do the live stream, get signed up now. Tara Vanderveer just broke Mike Krzyzewski's all-time NCAA wins record, 3-time national champion at Stanford University women's basketball, is going to be presenting. Pete Steinberg, recent guest on the podcast, 2-time World Cup coach for USA women's rugby, 11-time national champion collegiate coach, women's rugby, former performance director for USA Rugby, and his day job, leadership consultant in the business world and the author of the book Leadership Shock. And if just go listen to that podcast, and I think you'll love it. I think it's episode 373. And you'll get to meet Pete in person there as well because he lives in Colorado. So August 9th, 10th, and 11th, Denver, Colorado. It's going to be an amazing event. It's amazing every year. It's so much fun. So many great people. So hopefully you can join us. You can just go to changethegameproject.com and click on the Way of Champions or WOC conference, I think it says on my new website, and check it out. Okay. Or Jerry's website, wayofchampions.com as well. And that's where you can find all our books. Book speaking engagements, set up meetings, all sorts of different stuff there. Okay. I want to thank all of our Patreon podcast champions, the people who make a small donation every month to help us put out this podcast. So if you are enjoying what you listen to, go to patreon.com. For the price of a cup of coffee, maybe a venti, you can support the podcast and you can help us put this out every month. 370 something straight weeks we've done now. Haven't missed a week. So be part of the solution here. Use your influence for good. All right. But for now, get ready, get set. Margaret Domka, Dr. Skye Arthur Banning, U.S. Center for Mental Health and Sport, and a great discussion of how we as coaches and parents can provide the best environment for athletes. Enjoy, everyone.